Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training Japan. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Derek Baines, who is the Regional General Manager, Japan and Korea for the Australian Tourism Body. Do they still call it a commission or have they changed the name?
Well, we're Tourism Australia
Tourism
now,
Australia now, right, okay.
Originally the Australian Tourist
Used
Commission.
to be the old, I'm still back in the old days, the good old days, yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? You have a very similar background to me in many ways. You've come through Griffith University. We both graduates of that university. Yeah. I'm presuming you did modern Asian studies as well, yeah, which no longer exists, unfortunately. It's been subsumed into international business now, but you know, it's great that you're running the operation here. How did you get to this point and what have you been doing? You obviously had an interest in Asia. Yeah, that's why you chose that faculty. It was a very specialised faculty in those days, and a very unique faculty as well, bringing, you know, economics, society, politics, all together, language into one place, which wasn't common, and looking at the modern aspects of Asia at that time. So take us back. What was spurred your interest to do that program and what happened after that?
Well, I was interested in Japanese, particularly during high school as well. And I was given the opportunity to do Japanese in school, which was a good grounding.
But why did you have an interest in Japan?
Well, I think it just developed. It was one of those language options that one's presented with in high school. And for some reason, I selected Japanese and not French, not German.
Yeah.
And pretty soon developed a really strong interest in Japanese. And as high school went through, I thought some sort of further study of Japanese and Asian history, politics, economics would be a good direction. And in those days, of course, trade was starting to really open up, and the relationships with Japan and some of the other Asian countries were really strengthening. So, my mum and dad were pretty supportive as well. They thought it was a good direction and matched my interests to some extent. So I took up Japanese as a double major and Asian studies, as you say.
And so you graduate from Griffith and, you know, this is a newly minted institution. It opened in 75 for undergraduates. You came in, I think you mentioned 79.
That's right.
And come out, about 82?
81, 82.
81, 82. And probably at those time, we were probably ahead of the curve in terms of, graduates coming out for a very specialised institution like that. What did you do after you graduated? What sort of work could you find? What did you wind up doing?
Well, I remember back when I graduated, there was a recession. So it wasn't a great employment market at that point. So I did a few part-time jobs and got some money together and thought I'll do a working holiday in Japan. So in 83, I came up here and, of course, taught English, as a lot of people did, and worked in a trading company part-time and did odd jobs, essentially, for a year. Enjoyed it. My language improved at least a bit over that time and got to know a little bit about Japanese business protocols, etc. Then the following year, I went back to Brisbane and worked for a year in the project office for Seito and Hitachi. They were building power stations in Queensland at the time, 3 power stations. And there was a big office of around 70 Japanese engineers and commercial people who'd come in to manage the contract. And for Brisbane in 1984, it was somewhat of a culture shock, I think, all round for the Aussies, but also for the Japanese who'd come across for a few years. And the role I was working in was a procurement sort of role, but more than that, I think it was more like a cultural bridge to try and smooth out some of the ruffled feathers that would naturally occur in business between the two cultures. So that was a grounding. I didn't know anything about engineering or building power stations. I learned a little bit, but it was more a business liaison role.
And how long were you there?
That was a year.
Yeah, okay. And then what happened?
Then another chance came up to work in Japan at the World Expo.
Right.
That was
Tsukuba?
Tsukuba.
Yeah.
The technology expo. And
this is 85.
1985.
Mm-hmm.
That was a pretty big group of Australians coming up. It was a fairly big investment by the Japanese government. There were 30 Australians in the team, and many of us are still in touch from those days. Some are still living here, and others have gone on to do other things in Australia or elsewhere. And again, that was I think, good grounding for me, particularly in marketing and public relations activities. And probably my early interest in tourism opportunities was from Tsukuba. Because that's when the market was starting to grow.
Plaza Accord in 85, yen
Yes.
strengthens, Japanese start travelling the world in
Yes.
masses and
That's right.
tour groups, right? So
Yeah, Qantas and other airlines were increasing their capacity from around that time. So there was an interest in travel and what do Japanese want to do when they come to Australia, or how can we present the best of Australia to them? And well, a long time later, here I am, but there was a long period working for Qantas in the interim.
Right.
And
this is based in Sydney or?
Well, in Sydney and Brisbane and in Tokyo.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. So I had 31 years with Qantas.
31?
31
gosh,
years.
Yeah. Get a Purple Heart for that, I wonder.
Well, a few long service badges along the way at least. But that was a really interesting time. And Qantas, as you would know, has gone through many guises over the years. And when I joined, it was still in 100% government ownership.
Right.
And that was from, well, when I joined in 88 through to the mid-90s, the government ownership was still in place. But from about 1992, partial privatisation was put in place. And I worked for some years on the Asian route planning side and looking at sales opportunities in Japan, initially from the head office in Sydney. And then I spent 4 or 5 years up here in Japan as marketing manager for Qantas in the mid-90s. After the bubble, but thankfully the tourism business was still increasing. It had a momentum which outlasted and outran the bubble itself.
Australia became a bit of a honeymoon destination there, rivaling Hawaii. Hawaii had always had a really, I don't know why, but a particularly firm grip on honeymooners, but Australia also did pretty well.
That's right. It was a big honeymoon destination. Also just a general tourism destination. Business groups and school groups also became quite important. But that was the golden era of honeymoons, that's for sure.
Well, what was it, 6.5 hours to Cairns and 9 hours to Sydney, 1 hour time difference. You think about flying to Hawaii or the States or Europe, it's much easier to get down there.
It is a much easier destination for a short trip, particularly. And most Japanese who are on holiday are looking at 5 or 6 days, maybe, or even shorter in some cases. So if you have a pretty short holiday like that, a destination that has virtually no time difference is a godsend, because if you do need to come back and go straight back to work, you can manage that. There's no jet lag at the other end to speak of. And flight times are relatively short, as you say. So there's some of the basics that we still like to promote and like to tell people about. And we can't do that often enough, because the perception, I think, a lot of people have is that it's a bit further away. And a lot of people don't think about the time difference so much until it's too late.
It's sort of funny, isn't it?
So we can
Singapore
tell
is
them about
quite far from Japan, because just the angle you've got to go across to get to Singapore, whereas Australia is basically straight down. It's pretty quick. So after Qantas, what happened after Qantas then?
Well, after Qantas, I joined Tourism Australia.
Right.
And I was working for some time in the loyalty division in Qantas, the frequent flyer team. And another interest of mine that I was able to develop through that time was working with small to medium-sized businesses. And I had done some programs within Qantas to better reach our SME customers in the airline. And I continued doing some of that through the loyalty team. We built up a business called Qantas Business Rewards, which is essentially a loyalty program for businesses, which sits alongside the consumer loyalty program. So we built that up and ran it for a few years. It's still going from strength to strength, but after I'd done that for 5 or 6 years and it was on its feet and making good money for the airline and the customer base was growing well, I was looking for something new to do. And happily, at that point, Tourism Australia was recruiting for a new manager for the Japan office. And
was Greg McAllen running the operation here when you were down there?
Greg was here for several years and probably about 10 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
I know Greg quite well. Yeah,
Very
we used to work.
Flamboyant gentleman.
Yeah, we used to work together when I was in Qantas office here. We had a lot to do. Qantas and Tourism Australia, in many ways, are natural fits. And we used to do quite a bit together.
Yeah, I've lost touch with Greg, actually. So when did you take the posting up here?
I took the posting about a month after COVID hit.
Great timing.
Which was
great timing.
Superb timing.
Yeah.
And
was that both Korea and Japan at that time, or did
not
that
at
come
that
later?
point?
Okay, this is just Japan at that time.
At that stage, just Japan. Yes, I added Korea to my portfolio mid last year, so that's relatively new. Yes, so COVID struck, and I think it was the day the Australian borders closed was my last day at Qantas.
Oh, gee.
After having announced that I was going to leave and take up a new job with Tourism Australia, and a few weeks passed, and of course the situation got
so you
worse.
Could you actually leave the country? Could you come?
No, I couldn't leave.
Couldn't leave, right? Yeah.
For some time.
Right.
So I was running the Japanese office from Sydney.
Right.
For about 5 or 6 months.
Wow.
Before the visa was made available to come in to Japan. Both Japan and Australia had fairly strict border closures, as you know, and thanks to good technology and Zoom and Teams and other things, we were able to manage quite well. But yes, by that September I was here, and we had a pretty comprehensive plan of marketing right through COVID, and thanks to support from the government and also from our partners here, who many of whom had gone into semi-hibernation, but media was still eager for good stories. The consumers were still really, really interested, and we conducted our consumer research regularly right through that period, as we do every quarter or so.
And Australia always, from my memory, maybe out of date now, but as I recall, Australia always scores very well from the Japanese consumer perspective about the country, what they expect when they're going to be there, safety, quality of things, the variety of things, uniqueness of things. So it's always seen to have a very good image.
We do find that in our research, and it's a good place to be and a good basis for the marketing that we do. The desire for safety and security is top of mind always with Japanese travellers, and not just Japanese, of course. And Australia ranks quite highly there in our research. An interest in the great open spaces we have, the outdoors, the natural attractions, beaches, wildlife in particular is a great platform for our marketing, and Japanese love the Australian wildlife. Increasingly, food and wine or food and drink is a big decision choice driver for tourists. And again, not just Japanese, but particularly here, we know that the depth and breadth of the food and wine experiences we have do resonate with Japanese. And in a way, if you don't have it, then you're not in the consideration set in many cases. Some of the shorter haul destinations from Japan, Korea or China or Singapore, for example, Vietnam, all have that vibrant food culture which Japanese like. And even for the longer haul destinations, food and wine is a really big thing. So that's something we put a lot of effort into, to present the breadth of the experiences we can offer, and not just high-end dining, but a regular everyday cafe, good coffee, and the social experiences that go with that, fresh produce, etc. A really important part of our marketing.
So if we think about leading in Japan, which is the key topic on this discussion, thinking about when you were in Qantas in Tokyo, were you leading a team at that time here? You had a group within the organisation that was reporting to you?
Yes, I did. I had a number of responsibilities at that time. Marketing was a key one, but I was also in charge of HR for Qantas and Qantas Freight at that point. And it was a fairly big team. We had around 100 people in Qantas at that stage. Fewer these days, given automation, etc., but a pretty big team. And many of those staff were long-term, long-standing staff, some great people, quite a few younger people who'd come in as the flights increased over that period. So I got a really good, I guess, grounding in HR management at that point. And it was a unionised environment in Qantas at that point. And as many of your listeners would know, Japanese industrial relations can be quite interesting, a roller coaster ride, whereby most of the year things are very calm, but they can become quite tough in terms of negotiating and operationally at some points during the year, using shunto as an example, the wage increase negotiations.
Also safety too, isn't it? Because you've got a highly dangerous environment where people are working in on the tarmac at the airport, and also behind the scenes with loading cargoes and those types of things. So it's not your typical, job, I guess. You've got people with different roles they're playing, and also just the industry itself from a flight safety point of view. You've got air crew, you've got ground crew, you've got a whole raft of people who are at different points in time, I guess, putting themselves in sort of relatively difficult situations depending on what's going on. We've seen the tragedy recently with what happened at Haneda. Very shocking. So I guess I can imagine that the HR component could be quite difficult. In terms of, I guess, you'd had leadership experience in Australia before you got here, but you know Japan pretty well. You've been here a long time. But what were some things that you found a bit challenging to be leading a team in Japan? And it doesn't necessarily just have to mean just the HR role, but just in general leadership terms.
Well, I think in the Japanese environment, and there are so many permutations and combinations of this depending on the actual industry or the company, of course, but in general terms, I think you would categorise the decision-making process in Japan as a bit more detailed and a bit of a longer process in many cases. To be effective and to be thorough, things take a bit more time, or they can. And there is probably a natural tendency for Western managers coming in to be a little on the impatient side, and
that would be me.
Well, I guess we all have that desire to get things done.
And definitely me.
Well, exactly right. It's an aspect of Western management not so much impatience, but quick decision making.
Get it moving.
Effective, quick, get it done. That way of thinking pervades a lot of Western style management. And of course, in Japan, it's quite different in the sense that consensus building is really important, explaining ideas, the whole process of bubbling ideas up or floating ideas, what ifs, etc. It's quite important as a mechanism, to get important views from people who need to do the work in the long term. But it's also important in having people understand what management is trying to achieve. And I think to be effective here, we need to understand that and to utilise that interest that the staff have in, why are we thinking that? Why would we want to go in that direction? What about this? Give everybody a legitimate say. And this doesn't mean the process needs to go on for an indeterminate time, but build time in to the process. And
I think this is the nexus, isn't it? We have a very short time frame, which creates pressure, which creates problems. But if we actually understood we have to have a bit of margin here, we take some of that stress off ourselves. Yeah, so building it into the start's probably a wise move.
I think that's right. And the flip side of that is starting early enough with your head office as well. And I guess conditioning head office executives to the need to do that. The need, but also the benefit of doing that. If we want our local teams here in Japan to be fully on board, to be fully ready to go when the button's pushed, then you really need to go through that process. And
which is really a consensus process, isn't it?
It is.
In terms of that point, be it when you were at Seito and what you observed there, or in your years with Qantas, working down there or up here, and also now with Tourism Australia, what have you found that works well to get a Japanese team engaged?
Well, I think it's a combination of a few things, and engagement is a buzzword in many senses, and it can mean different things to different people. But
we can't translate it either, which is a bit tricky, isn't it?
Right. That's true. So I think it's a combination of understanding people's strengths and their interests and their skills, and trying to nurture that. The way people, or the reason people get engaged ultimately is because they want to be part of something. And the best way, I think, is to position it in terms of each individual if you can. Depends how big your organisation is, but at least try to spark some level of passion and particular interest amongst people. It's about, appealing to their thoughts or their history or their way of thinking about things. Training's also important and skilling exercises. But I think if you can appeal to people's interest and their history and their experience, then I think it shows that you're interested in them, but it's also a way for them to be able to enjoy the ride a bit more.
And you've had the contrast of running a team in a commercial enterprise, being Qantas, and now you're running Tourism Australia, which is a government agency. So what's the difference there in terms of, you've got a cash bonus, promotion, incentive in the commercial sector, which is pretty strong. Government, not so great. So that lever, the money lever, is probably not as easy to get going here in the non-commercial sector. But in terms of any things you notice between having run teams where there's a financial element to having perhaps less strong of a financial element in this organisation here, in terms of getting the people here engaged?
It's a really interesting question, and it's one that I pondered a bit before I joined Tourism Australia, wondering how we could have a commercially minded approach to promoting tourism, but in a government organisation. So exactly as you say, I think we're lucky in this organisation in that almost all of the people we have come from tourism industry backgrounds. So almost all of our teams, both in Australia and around the world, have worked in private enterprise before, many, if not most, in tourism-related industries. So they understand the commercial drivers of tourism, as well as the consumer aspects of tourism. And here in Japan, no different. I think almost all of our people have at one time or another worked for a travel agency or a wholesaler or an airline or both. And that means they know how our partners think, our partners being the travel agents, being the airlines, or have worked for media before. Another important partnership element we have is working with the media. So our teams know how that works. And the measures that we use to determine our success are, apart from the pure profit of the organisation, which is not what we do, but we have quite hard and fast KPIs around the number of visitors to Australia from each of our source countries, the spend levels that those visitors can bring to the Australian economy, how far those visitors move out of the capital city gateways, so the dispersal around the country. So there are a number of key, virtually economic criteria that drive what we do. So in that sense, there are some specific numerics that we are always held to account on by senior management and by government as well, as part of the tourism policy. So
now, are they consistent measures? Because one of my frustrations when I wasn't doing tourism promotion, I was doing trade promotion, was the goalposts, change of government. Oh, new goalpost, Oh, we're being measured on income, fees. Oh, we're being measured on, exports by, non-mineral, non-resource trade type of thing. And it flipped around, And so for the teams that I was running, it gets a bit frustrating, You sort of go forth in one direction. Okay, no, we stop doing that. We're going to go, what about all the people we're dealing with over here? Now we're over here. So as long as you've got some consistency, I think it's easy to keep people engaged. Is it a consistent thing, or are you finding that bouncing around creates some problems around engagement?
I think it's pretty consistent.
That's good.
And those key measures are in place and have been for a long time. They make sense. I guess where things are changed a bit or improved is around the specifics of measuring marketing effectiveness. But as marketing develops as a science, naturally, and as the technology changes, naturally there are more specific measures of marketing success or reach or other aspects of marketing that develop. But in terms of the fundamentals, we're pretty consistent there.
That's good.
Yeah.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So what are the things you find work well? You talked about getting to really understand people, their raison d'etre, what they're trying to do as part of getting people engaged. Any other things you found were good for getting engagement? It used to be go out drinking, company trips. I mean, all that stuff seems to have gone by the wayside now. But what's the sort of replacement for that type of activity?
Yeah, that's true. Looking back over a few decades in Japan, the company trip was still a thing. When I was working in that Qantas role 20, 30 years ago, it was starting to wane. There were a lot of the younger people were getting less interested in doing that. And as you say, yes, it doesn't really happen very much now. And going out drinking, well, I guess there's a modern day equivalent to that, which is the occasional lunch or team dinner.
Yep.
But the Nijikai and the Sanjikai, while they might happen with some individuals, we don't sort of force that on anybody, of course. So it's more about a convivial dinner and having a chat, but with limited time, so people can go home to their families or their friends or whatever they want to do. Sure, have a few drinks and relax, not talk about work, ideally. And we do that. In fact, we had a nice New Year lunch with the team just last week after the holidays. And I think those social elements are important, but these days people value their private lives. Yeah, I guess as they always have, but at least these days they're actually saying, well, I would rather not.
Yeah, the compulsion part is no longer
is not
working.
Yeah, that's it.
What about getting ideas? Often someone like yourself, you've had a very strong commercial background. You know Japan extremely well. You've got a big background in marketing, in HR, in logistics, in a whole raft of procurement. You've got a very broad spectrum of things you've done, and that often informs your ideas about what's possible, because you've seen different worlds, and so you as a leader can often come in and go, right, okay, here we go. But often when we do that, the ideas that are latent there are never sourced, they're never picked up, because the people working there also, have ideas, and maybe in the past they've never had the opportunity to voice those ideas or raise their hand, or they were never asked, and so you don't really scoop up from the team some innovation idea possibilities. So what have you found works well to have people come up with ideas and let them bring them up to you rather than you telling them how it's going to be?
It's such an interesting area, the whole area of creativity in the work environment and innovation. It's something I'm quite interested in, and like yourself, maybe different topics, I write quite a bit. And in terms of creative writing, the process of creativity is something that scholars have been working on for a long time. The neuroscience of creativity, etc. It's fascinating. And I think it's a number of things. It's about giving yourself, or being given, the opportunity to, whatever you might call it, meditate or chill out or have time out to let ideas ferment and bubble up. It's about some skills, of course, as well. But in terms of true creativity, I think it's about giving people, whether it's yourself or your team, the space and certainly the okay to bring ideas to the table. But before you bring them to the table, you have to come up with them, right? And that's not easy either. No. If you're in a busy environment, as we all are, in a corporate environment where you have a weekly meeting or you've got a structure, So it needs to be nurtured. And I try to do that.
Well, I was just going to say before, the sort of classic, okay, who's got some ideas? Now, that approach in Japan is going to go nowhere because people are going to sit there and think, well, I do have ideas. In fact, I've got some genius ideas, but I'm a bit cautious about voicing those in front of other people. I might get laughed at, criticised, or I might be told off by the boss, or the boss might, say something to me I'm not going to like. So I'll just keep it to myself. And so in a public environment, that, calling forth ideas doesn't tend to work very well. So have you found an approach where you can actually appeal to people individually so they don't feel any pressure in that public environment, but they can still bring ideas up to the boss?
Yes, I think I agree that immediate pressured environment is not necessarily the way to do it. People want to think about how to present those ideas as well. So if you don't give them a chance to think about it in advance, that could be counterproductive. And there's always that element of your peers perhaps either directly or indirectly showing they don't think it's a great idea. And also part of the whole consensus building, right? Individual ideas aren't necessarily part of the tradition in terms of corporate life. So the way we do it here is I certainly encourage ideas, and I've made it really clear and I think demonstrated as well as having said it, that as a marketing organisation, which essentially is what we are, we are all about ideas and how to present Australia in a slightly different way or a different way to tell the story. And it links back to some of my real core interests in creative writing. But how do we pitch a story to the media? They're looking for something fresh, interesting, different. We know what the drivers are from research, but how do you translate that into a pitch to a newspaper or a magazine where they can say, yep, we've never thought about it that way before, let's go down that path. So look, I think it's all about making sure people do really believe that their ideas are going to be listened to, and hopefully at least some of them can be implemented. And even if it's a long-term burn, some of the bigger ideas take 2 or 3 years to come to fruition. And that's also a challenge, I guess, in working with head offices too.
Yeah.
We have an annual plan, as most organisations do, and then maybe a half-yearly revision to the plan to reflect changing circumstances. But when we talk about 3 or 4 year projects, sure, we get support and we get positive reactions, but it takes a lot of effort and perseverance to develop something that's going to take 3 or 4 years.
And to get the commitment financially and resource-wise, to support that, right?
Which you can't often get. So.
Yeah. And they're all looking at the next election cycle as well and thinking about what's this going to mean for us, as well.
In almost any organisation, finances are, apart from, I guess, longer-term capital, but operating finances are annual. And you can't usually commit to a specific amount of money for the next year or the year after. Maybe in general terms, yes, but...
Come back to us next time,
right.
Derek, and we'll see if we've got the money. Yeah.
So that has to be translated then into kind of message for those people working on longer term projects. Well, yeah, we do support it. Oh, well, are we sure we're going to get the money? Is it worth doing this now? Because we can't, we're not going to pay for it for 2 years.
Yeah.
Well, yes. And we've got commitment from X and Y. And if we keep moving in this direction, we will get the support we need.
Even though you're a government entity, I mean, you are coming from the private sector. Your brain is private sector. The individuals you mentioned before coming from media, hospitality, tourism, all got private sector brains as well. So even though you're sort of within the organisation as a government-funded organisation, the actual IP is all private sector here. And so, you have that tension, I guess, between a government system, which may not be as commercially nimble or agile as perhaps the people working here are trying to go forward. So in terms of building trust with teams, what have you found works well? Because we're talking now about trying to have a little bit of a longer term plan, even though we don't have funding in place, because that comes down to, as I said, should we make the effort? Are we going to be burning partners here locally because we're committing to things and then we can't deliver? So we're better not to do it. But then we can't plant any seeds, and we just, it's a very frustrating, I guess, equation that's going on there. So what have you found works well to build trust with teams in Japan, be it with Qantas or now with Tourism Australia?
Well, largely it's about your track record, I think, and hopefully over time teams can develop a sense of comfort that what's being said is actually supported and is what's going to happen. I think if you're looking at the partnership angle, which you raised, another important thing, how do you engender some comfort with partners that a longer term play is going to be right for them as well as for us? And one example, the memorandum of understanding, which is known and loved in Japan and some other countries as an expression of partnership. Recently, we signed a 3-year agreement with HIS, the large travel agency. And whilst that doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of detail for years 2 and 3, it is a real demonstration and it's a framework to work on, that we work together for this purpose, that Australia is a key destination for HIS in this case. So it provides a framework, and it's also something that they can rely on and they can use as a promotional tool as well. So some press coverage was engendered from that, and in the Japanese environment, that kind of approach is useful, I think. And we don't do this every 5 minutes with everybody. It's with key partners, of course. So that's one way we can do that, and I think that also has an impact on the teams.
Was this something that came up from their side, or is this something that you saw an opportunity, having worked with partners previously in your role in Qantas, thinking, hey, you know what, we could partner, even though we're a government organisation, we could partner with a commercial operation like HIS, and we can have a bit of a longer term play here. Where did that original idea come from?
This particular one was somewhat unique, but we did a similar one with a number of travel industry companies during COVID.
Right, okay.
Which was done under the auspices of our minister at the time. And that was, again, I think a good way to keep the engagement going through that really difficult period when a lot of these big travel agencies were focusing on domestic. They were shedding staff or hiring out their staff to other organisations, COVID call centres or other organisations.
And also we closed the border, and we even closed the border between states within Australia. Queensland, New South Wales borders closed. So how do you travel? How do you enjoy your time in Australia? You can't even cross the border.
Exactly.
Yeah, quite strenuous.
The border closures were clearly a structural problem for us all, and the Japanese border was effectively closed as well. And the quarantine arrangements, which were put in place for good reason at both ends of Japan-Australia route, put off a whole lot of people from travelling, even if they could there at one point. But I think that MOU process was something that we've done a number of times, and in a few of our other regions as well, mainly in the Asian regions, I think. And it's one way to, I guess, semi-publicly demonstrate shared goals and objectives, and the process of developing that as well is also a good way to get closer to people. Well, what are we going to say here? Well,
you mean get close to people within the organisation here you're talking about, or
more
the
about
partner
the
group?
partners? But
Partners, okay, right.
the process of drafting these things and writing them, and well, what do you think about this? Is that exactly what we want to say? Oh, how about this? Oh, yeah, that may be a little bit more in tune with our mutual objectives. So that process of getting there, as well as signing it, as well as promoting it, I think helps us develop trust and understanding, certainly.
What about culture? Because you've come from a commercial job, big job in Qantas. You've come in, you bring that commercial mindset with you. As say, the people working here coming also from the private sector, so they've got the commercial mindset. So the new boss, obviously everyone has a type of cultural perspective about what type of working environment they want to create, how they want people to interact, how they want to interact with the people. What was your thinking about, okay, I'm in Sydney, my team's in Tokyo, that's March, everything sort of slowed down. I get up here in September, quite a long time later, but now I'm on the ground. So I have a chance now to really develop my leadership role here, and I want to have a certain working environment, create a certain culture. What was in your mind about the type of culture you wanted to create?
A number of things come to mind. One is really to allow people to be more creative. And I think every organisation needs its working rhythm and rules, etc., and protocols. But what I have tried to do, and part of it, I guess, was kick-started by COVID in a way, a little bit more flexibility in terms of working days, hours, time in the office, to avoid the peaks of the commuter rush. So we've come out of COVID, and happily the organisation is still functioning well, and people are doing their thing.
Is everyone back in the office, or you got a hybrid, a split environment, or?
It's a hybrid, I guess you'd say. What we're doing now is having a 3-day a week in the office arrangement, which is somewhat flexible in itself. We have one core day during the week where we have our team meetings and everybody has a chance to interact with everybody else. 2 days a week at home, or if you're travelling. And the working hours are fairly flexible as well to avoid rush. And I think right through Japan, at least in the service industries or office-based industries, COVID has probably, if there's anything good that came out of COVID, that might be it, that it's led to more flexible working hours in many cases. The lunchtime rush of everybody gets
12
off
o'clock
from their desk at 12 and back by 1 or before never made a lot of sense to me.
It was in the work contracts. I couldn't believe it, It's like you read the work contract, it says you'll go to lunch at 12. Like, what? Yeah, but anyway.
It never really made sense to me from the beginning, from a number of perspectives. If you ring somebody in another organisation and they're at lunch, well, okay, they're at lunch, they'll call you back later.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't have to queue at the restaurant.
That's right, waste time.
At 12 o'clock or fight to get in the elevator. But in that vein, we've established, I think, quite a popular work pattern now, and everybody does their work excellently. A lot of our team need to be out and about with partners. Some of those offices are on the other side of town, and our people often live far away from the centre.
I think HIS is in Shinjuku, aren't they?
They have a big office in Shinjuku, another office in Toranomon down there. But look, it just makes sense to me. And in previous organisations, in Qantas, there was a fair bit of flexibility, at least in the office environment. If you get your job done, well, if it means you can spend a bit more time with your family for an important engagement or event or time of the day, then
great.
It makes for more engagement and more enjoyment. Yeah.
In terms of if you were going to give some advice, say someone who knew you rang you and said, "Hey, Derek, I've just been given this big job in Japan. They want me to come up and run the organisation there, but I don't know Japan. I don't speak Japanese. Well, what should I do? How can I be successful? Give me some advice." What would be some advice you'd give them?
Well, I think there's a lot of literature that you can delve into and resources such as the ones that you're creating with your work as well, Greg. But
I don't know if did you ever read my book, Japan Business Mastery? There's a chapter at the end there, chapter 36, on the problem for change agents being sent to Japan, and it's it's a chapter that everyone who's going to be sent to Japan should read, which it tells you what risk you're putting yourself at trying to, because the organisation says, "Well, Derek, we expect some changes in Japan, and you're our person to do it." And then you get up here and then you realise, oh, okay, hang on a minute. And then you're the meat and the sandwich. And often it can be a very bloody affair. So I always encourage people to read that chapter before you agree to anything.
Chapter
and then
36.
Renegotiate.
I will.
Yeah, renegotiate your package with the boss before you agree, you know.
Yeah.
That thing before you said about headquarters, you know, getting headquarters on board and having headquarters understand time and headquarters understand collaboration and consensus and decision-making here, all that stuff. You don't know about that before you get on the plane. You get up here and you realise, oh, hang on a minute, I can't do what headquarters wants because it's going to kill the clients or it's going to do this or do that. And then suddenly, boom, you get smashed. I digress. But anyway, please go on.
Well, I think that's absolutely a challenge for people that haven't had any grounding in this market. And you would hope that in many cases or most cases, employers pick the right people to run their overseas offices, but it depends very much on the organisation. Some rotate people around and they're generalists, they're not specialists, and that's a completely separate topic, I guess. But I think, again, back to the head office issue, it's important to make sure the head office executives and day-to-day contacts are also engaged in the process that you're engaged in. So it shouldn't be a black box as such. It should be a matter of me as a regional manager sharing some of those insights with colleagues who support us, who make decisions or who provide resources. And in 90% of the cases, they appreciate the insights. But it's about doing that in a timely manner, building a bit more time into the process, or at least anticipating some of the roadblocks that might be put in place if you want to charge through. I think a change agent is fine in Japan, but it's a Japanese-style change agent, right?
And that's the nub, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the nub of the problem. And what other advice would you give someone who's going to be sent up here to run the organisation?
Well, I think listening is really important. And that can be listening to your customers or your staff or opinion leaders around the country. And it's all of the above. But on a day-to-day level, it's really listening to and being seen to be listening to your own people who are doing their jobs every day and often have broader and more specific contacts than you do.
Been doing it for 20, 30 years sort of thing.
Doing it for a long time. Listen and understand, ask questions, because not all of it, I guess, intuitively makes sense, right? You wonder why this is happening or why these relationships are as they are, for example. So absolutely listen. I think that consensus building is is really important. And as we've said a little earlier, that's getting the ideas out in the first place, whether it be in private or in a ideas session or in a team meeting, and then working that through. Even today, after many years of working here, I admit that there are days or times when I think we've made a decision,
but
everybody else doesn't think we've made the decision yet. And I say that quite openly.
Yeah.
Things that I might consider to be fairly routine or fairly simple, and in my own mind, we've talked
moved
about
on.
it.
We've moved on from that.
Decided we move on.
Yeah.
But of course, somebody will say, "Well, but what do you mean exactly? Let's repeat all that and make sure everybody is exactly on the same page."
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be frustrating, but mostly it's useful in the end. So I don't have all the answers, and my immediate instincts sometimes are a little bit off center. Sometimes I think that's so simple, or that's so clear in my own mind.
Yep. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I often notice in Western environments, probably along the same spectrum, meetings can happen, people talk, they express their opinions quite clearly, quite strongly, but often the meeting ends without a real agreement in Western contexts as well, and nobody takes notes, and people leave, and there are 10 different interpretations of what the decision was.
The one they prefer.
Or the one that they were thinking. And even if somebody says, "Well, that's right, that's a wrap, we've done that."
Knock that over.
Fine, everybody's like, yeah. But ask 10 people and you get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
So I think in this environment, it's more step by step.
Yep.
Try and make sure that everybody is fully understanding, whether it's, I don't know, you follow it up in writing but it's usually a verbal thing.
Yeah.
Give people a chance to talk about it. So it's all about building in the time, but making sure everybody's on board. And of course, some people will not agree with what you want to do, and it's never perfect, but
it's like putting your hunko upside down on the ringi seido, that piece of paper that goes around.
As a protest.
All the divisions or sections that have to put their stamp on it, they put upside down and saying, "I'm stamping this, but I don't actually agree with it." Yeah. So what about language? Should they learn Japanese?
Managers coming to the market? Oh, absolutely. I think so. And gee, it's not an easy language, really, is it?
No, it's not.
Every day, and I'm not really here to date myself, but it's 50 years since I've started learning Japanese.
My goodness,
from grade
50 years, wow.
8.
Yeah, really.
Okay, so it's a long haul. Not that I've been in language school
for 50 years
for 50
continuously,
years,
but
But most of that time, I've either been learning or using it, or trying to keep up. And every day there's something you learn, and happily I enjoy that. So you don't want to tell people that it's an easy thing to do. However, the basics are available, and the basics aren't that difficult. So absolutely people should learn to their ability or to the time they have available, the language.
Well, writing would be probably a big stretch to try and learn 3 different scripts maybe you can learn katakana that helps when you go shopping, and hiragana is quite relatively doable, but kanji is probably going to be a bridge too far for a lot of people. Being able to pick up a newspaper and read a newspaper, it's like 2,000 kanji minimum to do that, and depending on the context of the article, it may be you got the wrong 2,000, you need another 2,000 you don't know. So that's going to be harder, but speaking, perhaps that's something doable.
Yeah, I think so. And we all work mainly in our industry channels.
Yeah.
So I find that if I'm generally within the guardrails of travel, tourism, economics, general affairs, I'm confident and often interpret and I read and write and speak at press conferences, etc. But if you get outside your guardrails or your comfort zone, and if it's an issue of medical vocabulary or
it's like watching the NHK news. I mean, that you think, I've been here in Japan a long time. Of course I can watch the news, but the news, as you say, it could be in a very specialised area with very specialised, vocabulary. And you're like, I got no idea what the hell's going on here. But some other subject, you're like, I'm right on top of it. So it varies. And any final advice for them apart from learning the language and, about you're in the tourism specialty area? Any things they should be doing here from a tourism point of view you'd recommend?
Well, I think tourism's a great opportunity. Only about 20% of Japanese have passports, and that actually went down.
Higher than that.
Yeah, well, I would have thought so
about
too.
That, really.
I think it was never higher than about 25, and it went down to 17% during COVID,
right?
And it's building back up. So I think that's an opportunity in itself. Generally, for the travel industry and all of those surrounding industries to position products and services to encourage more Japanese to be more outward looking and visit
you think
overseas.
About it, you say, wow, 20%. But your flip side, say, wow, 80% growth possibility there.
Yeah.
That's untapped. It's
That's
really
right.
quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, Derek, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's been great to
talk to you.
Chat about this. So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.